In this video, we're going to take a look at the latest video from Mr. B of Red Pen Logic, where he critiques what I believe is a TikTok video where there's a brief exchange talking about the pro-life movement and whether God is pro-life. By the way, if you see movement right beside my shoulder in the back, that is one of my dogs chewing on a mitten. All right, let's take a look at the video. All right, we're going to begin by playing about 27 seconds of the clip. Then I'll pause it, give some commentary. We'll play another chunk, and then we'll kind of wrap it up.
I see the sign here. It says God is pro-life. What does that mean?
God is pro-life?
Yeah.
That's just what it means, yes. God created life.
Didn't God kill everybody on earth except for Noah and some farm animals on an ark?
I'm sorry.
Didn't God kill everybody on earth?
Okay, let's debrief this. All right, Mr. B is about to pull out his red pen and eviscerate the logic of the questioner. I think that instead what we should do here is pause for some reflection. We should pause for reflection on the fact that, first of all, this gentleman holding up this sign is not an outlier. Rather, what he is an indicator of a systemic problem in conservative evangelical Christianity, which is that Christians in the pew are not given even the most rudimentary tools for encountering and coming to wrestle with some of the deeply problematic moral and theological content within the Bible. The fact that you can have this fellow at a protest and just given the most basic, familiar Bible story, Noah's Ark, and yet confronted with the fact that Noah's Ark constitutes what appears to be the cruel and callous, indiscriminate mass drowning of the entire human population, save 7 people on the Ark. The fact that he's never even reflected on this issue and is completely caught flat-footed, taken aback by the moral incongruence between that story and his banner. I think this is just, it shows there is something deeply, deeply flawed in the way that evangelical conservative Christians are discipled. Now, admittedly, I don't know that this guy is an evangelical. He could be Catholic or something else. Let's just say it is a deep problem that is certainly common within evangelical Christianity. And that is a cause for reflection and self-introspection before we ever pull out the red pen to try to provide a rebuttal. Okay, let's hear what Mr. B has to say.
The video starts with a question. I see the sign here and it says God is pro-life. What does that mean? Now that's a fair question, and unbelievably the man holding the sign doesn't seem to know what his own sign means. Now there's a liability of using slogans like this, whether it's pro-life or pro-choice. Slogans are easy to misunderstand and misrepresent. For example, if someone says they're pro-choice, that doesn't mean they're always for every choice. They might be against choosing to drink and drive, for instance. The label pro-choice refers to something specific, the choice to have an abortion. Likewise, if someone says they're pro-life, that doesn't mean they're always against killing. For example, they might believe killing is justifiable in the case of self-defense or capital punishment. Having said all that, let's try to answer the original question. What does God is pro-life mean? Well, if we're being charitable, it probably means something like God is against abortion, humans intentionally killing unborn humans.
Okay, let's debrief now. Okay, my dog is unfortunately licking my face, but I'm going to continue on in talking. So the first thing I want to agree is, yes, I think it's fair to say that the sign really is only referring to God's evaluation of fetuses in utero. Narrowly, that's the meaning of the sign. I do think, however, and this is a point I'll come back to, that it's also fair to interpret the sign as having presumably a broader implicature, a broader implication that God values human life generally, and the fact that God generally values human life is why God values even fetuses in utero, because human life is so valuable. So if you give an example where God doesn't seem to value human life, that then undercuts the sign, which says that God does value the fetus in utero because God generally values life. So let's consider then the story. In the story of Noah's Ark, God is dissatisfied with the actions of moral agents on earth, and so he indiscriminately drowns the entire human population, including infants, including small children, including the mentally handicapped people, a whole raft of number of people who may have been themselves completely unable to carry out any moral actions or immoral actions, as it were. Notably as well, God does not apportion punishment to action. So it's not like some people receive a more serious punishment than others based upon their actions, and God's desire only to have proportional punishment to the sins committed. Rather, God indiscriminately kills everybody. Not only that, but God kills everybody by drowning. Now, drowning is surely what we would today constitute or define a cruel and unusual form of killing. Even if you accept that there are morally illicit forms of capital punishment, let's say you're a fan of lethal injection or firing squad or beheading or hanging, nonetheless, I think we would agree that forcibly drowning people is not a morally illicit form of capital punishment. And yet God, in the narrative of the flood, that is what he chooses, to punish the entire human population indiscriminately for the sinful actions of some human beings on earth. He drowns everyone. And notably, that also includes infants or fetuses in utero. He drowns them as well in virtue of drowning their mothers. Is this the kind of action that is consistent with a God who is generally valuing human life and thus who would value human life in utero? And I think the reasonable response to that is no, it is not. So what Mr. B should be now doing is saying, let's have an honest conversation about the deep moral cognitive dissonance that is created by a narrative such as the flood narrative, in which God indiscriminately drowns the entire human population, save a few people on the ark. The deeper issue here for the pro-life movement is that so often the pro-life movement is really just a movement that is pro-fetus in utero, but does not have that same concern for refugees at the southern border or for people living below the poverty line who cannot access adequate health care, or for the thousands of people every year that are killed in the United States with the use of legally and sometimes illegally owned firearms. Those are not equivalent issues of deep moral concern for many of the same people who purport to be so concerned about the fetus in utero. That is also a point that I think this video is inviting the pro-life movement to reflect on, and yet sadly Mr. B never broaches any reflection upon that point. Mr. B asks for charity for the person holding the pro-life sign and for the pro-life movement itself, but does not extend that same charity when others are inviting the pro-life movement and the broader evangelical Christian community to reflect on their own deep cognitive moral dissonance. One last thing that I want to note here, or a couple last things I want to note. Sorry, my dog's scratching the wall now. So one thing I want to point out is that not only does God, of course, indiscriminately drown people himself, God also commands the killing indiscriminately of civilians in multiple places in the Old Testament, such as Deuteronomy 7, Deuteronomy 20. In 1 Samuel 15, he specifically mentions the killing of infants as well. In places like Joshua 6 and Joshua 8, describe the mass slaughter of entire civilian populations within places like Ai and Jericho. And in Numbers 31, God commands the killing of all men, boys, and non-virgin females. In other words, that would include, by definition, women who are pregnant. And by killing them, you're killing fetuses in utero. So if God is allegedly against just the killing of fetuses in utero, or against people killing other people who are pregnant and thereby killing the fetuses in utero, yet he commands that very action by implication in passages like Numbers 31 or Deuteronomy 20 or 1 Samuel 15. How does Mr. B explain that? So even if he doesn't think that the flood narrative of Genesis 6-9 is the most immediately relevant one for challenging a person holding up a sign that says God is pro-life, nonetheless, he should be able to address how he brings into moral coherence these other passages with the claim that God is pro-life. This leads me finally to some just general observations about why I find conservative evangelical apologetics just so deeply, deeply unsatisfying. People like Mr. B, they ask for charity from others. Give the pro-life movement charity, give this man charity when he holds up his sign. And yet there's no charity extended to the TikTok video or to the profound issues of cognitive and moral dissonance that are raised by the video. So often, conservative evangelical apologetics misrepresents, oversimplifies, distracts, and then, as I'm pointing out here, does not extend charity to others when it asks charity be given for Christians.